Okay, our next speaker is Jim Dunbar, chairman of the ARI. What did 16th century Spain know about Florida's Big Bend coast? Jim.
Well, yesterday, Bruce McFadden talked about moonshots. Imagine it's before 1492 even. And you had no idea there was something called the New World. But you had the ability now to go explore the New World. How did they do that? How did they know where they were going? And how did they know they were even going to get there? And so that's what the subject of this talk is. And Spain had good scientists at the time. We don't know them really. You're not going to know the name. It's just something they did, something they loved to do. So how did Spain go about mapping a new world it didn't know about? To understand a background, we have to go to the early days of navigation. And that would be the days before there were sea charts, the days before there were compasses. So in about 1047 AD, the Chinese invented the compass. There were two types of compasses they invented. One was a lodestone on the end of a string. Trouble is, if you're on the deck of a boat and it's swirling around, you're never going to find north. And then they came up with sort of a cup of water with a needle that floated around. That would find north. But before the compass, the Mediterranean had been sailed for centuries, literally. And there were 8 points to the wind before you had a compass. And the ship's pilot had to go by the sun, where it was in the sky, and the stars and the moon at night, to basically and roughly determine what was north, northeast, east, and all the way around the compass. So it was 8 points of compass based on just the stars and the sun. And I would think an apprentice time would be long to be able to get that down. And then the compass came around in around 1247 AD in Italy. And it was the first marine compass that did anything. And all of a sudden, having to do the 8 points of the wind thing went out the window, and it would make sense, and that's happened. The first compasses had 8 points. And then they went to 16 points, and the 16-point compass sort of looks like the CIA badge of today. But it was, breaking it up, and finally to 32 points. And that's the compass that Magellan used to get around the world. But first we're going to go to map projections. It was Ferdinand Magellan that first circumnavigated, or his crew. He didn't make it, he died in the Philippines. But it was Ferdinand Magellan that first went around the world. And for those people that were flat earthers, well, they were dead wrong. And so, but how do you make a map of something that's a round sphere and project it out? That's a map projection. It's a Mercator projection. If you look at it, the central part of Earth looks in shape that we would expect, but if you look down at Antarctica, the poles are split. So you take a sphere and you make it into a flat sheet that's a cone, and you lay it on the ground, and there you go. You got a projection of the map, but how does it become useful? Today, there are The great circle navigation, that's what airplane pilots used. But in nautical times, they used rub lines. But just to give you an idea, if you look at the first figure there, this is the course from New York to Madrid. And you would think the top line is longer, but it isn't. It's the shortest distance because the Earth is a sphere. And that might make it a little bit clearer. So if you're taking an airplane from New York to Madrid, you can see the arc is a little bit less than going down the 40-degree latitude line from one place to the other. It's a bigger, longer area to travel. So that's one of the things they had to face. But they actually went the compass way, which was the longer route in the long run. And then there was this little problem with the Earth's magnetic field. A compass doesn't always point north. And if anybody wants to download that, they can. It will make you go crazy trying to figure that out unless you're into the Earth's magnetic field. But there was an argument that started in around 1550 because early mariners, when they were leaving from Spain, actually the Canary Islands, and traveling to the New World, they wanted to land, say, in Cuba or Espanol, Dominican Republic today. They would sail a compass course. And when they got there, they were too damn far south. And they had to go north to get to their target area. So one of the mappers came up with this idea, well, we'll just offset the lines of latitude in the New World versus the Old World, and that will correct for the ship pilot a very easy way to get from one place to the other, and they didn't have to go too far south and then go back up north to get to their target. And that was a good thing, but that got into the legal courts of Spain as an argument, and I'll get to that a little bit later. So the first chart, this is a 1367 Portolan chart. It doesn't have latitude on it at all, and it's just the Old World. And by 1367 AD, Spain had already made it down to the Canary Islands in their way of navigating. They had a compass, and there's all these little lines all over the place that make no sense to most people, and they didn't make any sense to me. Why are they doing that? And you'll also notice on this map, if you can see, there's a lot of place names all along the coast everywhere. So you would take one of the starbursts and one of the lines, you'd be traveling. Ships travel at that time was along the coastline at all times. And they'd come up to a point, oh, I know this landmark. I know this landmark, and that's where I have to turn off and go southwest or whatever direction it is. And sometimes that involved going to sea for more than a day. And they would have to fix their position the best they could at sea. This is not using latitude yet. And they would find a point they thought they were at because of the travel distances and the compass course heading there was. And the Spanish called those points of fancy because they didn't really know where they were for sure, but when they got to land, they could figure it out because they knew all the little place names along the coast. So those place names were really important to the pilots. They needed to know where in the heck they were when they got there. So this map which is called the Cantino planisphere, was smuggled out of Portugal in 1502. Some scholars think this map was done in the late 1400s by the Portuguese, and it shows, well, down in the corner, right there, you see Brazilian parrots. That's the coast of South America. That is probably Florida. That's definitely Cuba and Espanol. So in the late 1400s, Sebastian Cabot and his father John sailed to Newfoundland, come down the North American coast, and they're believed to have gotten down as far as Florida, turned around and went back to England. He was a pilot for England at the time. And they were just, you know, this is big stuff. Ferdinand Magellan has to be mentioned. 1519 to 1522, there's his compass. He circumnavigates the world. Flatlanders are disappointed. But everybody that was involved with Atlantic, open sea, Atlantic Ocean navigation at that time was fixated on how to get to the Spice Islands and the Pacific and the Asian coast. So by 1519, the same year that Magellan took off, we have the first map of the Gulf of Mexico, or Gulf of America, whatever you want to call it. And it was done by a pilot, and it's very crude. It almost looks like one of those things you'd see on the back of a cocktail napkin in a bar or something. But he showed there was no route to the Spice Islands in the Gulf, period. So we come back to the Port of Land sea charts. Do they make sense? So I've just taken 4 of them that show South Florida, Cuba, and so forth. And you see the rub lines across the map. They would give you a compass course. But they also had latitudes. But the red lines you're seeing on all these maps are actually the Tropic of Cancer. And if you're aware of this, the Tropic of Cancer moves back and forth with the Earth's rotation axis and so forth. So it changes a little bit. So it's not a latitude line. It's not a hard fixed thing. But they had them. And so from 1527 to 1590, the Spanish already knew the coastlines. They were starting to do the Portolan maps. They were starting to get the place names along the coastline to know where in the heck they were. So what about the sea chart makers who also happened to sail in a new world? There were 2 of them, or 2 notable ones. Sebastian Cabot, who left England, came to Spain, and became the pilot major for Spain. And Alonso de Santa Cruz, who was to become probably one of the best scientists of his time, in my opinion. And that's one of the maps you see behind his head there, and a picture of him in his younger days. But he was a cosmographer. He wasn't a cartographer. Cabot was a cartographer, not a cosmographer. So what's the difference? What do cosmographers do today? Oh, deal with those light questions like how fast is the universe expanding, things like that. But they were put in the position, okay, we've got a new world. We've got the potential for riches. How do we know where we are and go about navigating the waters? Nobody that was a cartographer could calculate longitude. They only had latitude, but not so for Alonso de Santa Cruz. After he got back from a New World trip, he went back to school and got his PhD, I guess at the time, in cosmography. He was already a noted mathematician, by the way. And this map here, it's only recently been discovered that this is his map. And his map that shows longitude and latitude of Spain. They said the projection was better, the precision was better than people like Mercator, who came up with the Mercator projection. So for his time, in fact, I think Gerhard Mercator probably stood on the shoulders of Alonso de Santa Cruz to come up with the projection to begin with. So where did they go? Little trip to the New World. Sebastian Cabot had been sort of given the go to the New World, go past the New World, get to the Spice Islands. But the headwinds as he went down the South American coast were supposedly too strong. He gets to the La Plata River. It's between the border of Guatemala and Uruguay, I believe. And they map that, and they cruise for 4 years along the coast of South America into the Caribbean and Veracruz. Who wouldn't want to go to Veracruz? After all, Cortez had gotten in there and did a little trick on the Aztecs, and he was bringing out gold and silver. And the first gold that was found in the New World came from Haiti, Espanol, in the mountains. But they had mined it out about that time. So Cortez comes in, and he's a big superhero because they found all the other and silver mainly. But so these guys are around the Caribbean, and they didn't leave until 1530. So Narvaez shows up in 1527. He wrecks part of his fleet down in Cuba due to a hurricane, rebuilds, and finally comes to Florida. And this is the traditional route. He comes bouncing along the southern Cuban coast, goes to Tampa, and then the rest of the story is by sea and land, from 1528 until 1536, when he finally walks to Mexico City and rediscovers Spanish civilization. So, and this is another thing. The De Soto expedition clearly states that they went to the Dry Tortugas and they took a compass chart due north to get to the Florida coast. Well, today the declination is about 4 degrees, a little less than that up here to the west. The declination in 1590 was 9 degrees to the west. So if you're sailing on a compass course from the Tortugas north, where does that take you? Well, for one thing, it does not take you within sight of land near Tampa Bay at all. You couldn't see it. I mean, in the, say, 80-foot, see if I can read it on here. Where's the 80-foot? Right there. So if you're on the top of the crow's nest on a galleon, you could see maybe 11.5 miles if it was a clear day. And you still would not see Tampa Bay. You're too far offshore. So, come up with a fourth hypothesis. Where did Narvaez's expedition land? And here it is graphically, which is Tortugas, they come into Appalachia Bay. They do not go to Tampa Bay. So that brings up, well, what about the 16th century precision for latitude? Even one of my old professors, Jerry Milanich, was complaining that one of the bays he thought was Tampa Bay was, just way off. And Alonso de Santa Cruz was insistent to the king, and from the king back down to the pilots, that they had to be trained up in this latitude thing. And when they came back to the old world from the new world, they had to give their pilots a rudder, and I don't mean the rudder of the ship, I mean the book that had all the notes of where in the hell they were, to Alonso de Santa Cruz and his cosmographers to get everything mapped out. So if we have questions about where 30 degrees north latitude is, Alonso de Santa Cruz had it right to begin with. 30 degrees is a little bit south of the top of Apalachee Bay. And it shows up in the Alonso de Santa Cruz maps, 3 of them, and also on the Sebastian Cabot map. And they also have place names on the coastline, one of them being the Bay of, okay, Madeline, you're going to have to correct me on this, Merlot, or something like that. Diego Muelo. Diego Muelo was the ship's pilot. His uncle had been a ship's pilot, very well known. And he knew of a bay, and they were trying to find the bay when they came to Florida, but they didn't find the bay until Narvaez disembarked and then walked along a coastline within sight of the ocean, and then it sort of bent off to the north a little bit and went to one of the Indian villages. They went inland after that, and when they went inland after that, Cabeza de Vaca was complaining that they hadn't found the yet. Well, they did find the bay. There were a number of ships that were trying to find out where this guy and where the expedition went, and they did finally get to the bay. And I should back up a little bit. The King Charles V and King Philip II recognized the cosmographers as the scientists they needed. The data they collected, if it was smuggled out of Spain, it was a death sentence. This was all top secret stuff. King Philip III comes in and said, let them have it. They got rid of their cosmographers and turned over their data to everybody, which the Dutch picked up on real quick with the Dutch West Indies Company, and they put 30 degrees north latitude in the same place the Spanish did. And this is hopping forward a little bit, but Pedro Menéndez de Avilés, I don't think there is any doubt in this world that he landed in Tampa Bay. He met the Tocobaga and that kind of thing. And he had a frigate that was both sailed and oared, which was very, to me, wise for the time, because if you didn't have the wind in the right direction, you pull the sails down, you got the oars going, and you got the hell out of places that you didn't want to be in. And there were plenty of hostile natives around. The earlier Spanish, before 1513 even, sort of were going along the Florida coast for their own purposes, many of them, unfortunately, for slaving. They would try to capture the native populations, take them back to where the sugar plantations were or whatever, and put them into enslavement. But there was another, the Diego Melo, he did not do that. He was a trader. And he would trade trinkets, beads, things like that to the Native Americans trying to find good stuff that they would be interested in. And lo and behold, somewhere on the Gulf Coast of Florida, they found a native population that they gave trinkets to, and they got gold. And he came back to Cuba, and if you read between the lines in the history, and maybe you shouldn't do this, but he bragged about, oh, there's gold. And after all, Cortez had previously been out there and found some riches. Maybe Florida was another place. I mean, I think it's quite likely that the exploration period, the fever for gold and riches beyond belief was still going on until Menéndez came in, and it was a different story with him. He came in and, got rid of the French Huguenots in Jacksonville. Then he did this thing around the coast of Florida and visited various Native American populations, including the Tocobaga. And then he left people behind to permanently settle St. Augustine, but he went back to Spain, which I think was the right choice. He was not after riches. He was more of a true army, you do this job and you get out, and he did that. So he goes back to Spain, and it's 1567. He gets to Madrid by July of 1567, and it appears, I don't know when he got there, but Alonso de Santa Cruz, our cosmographer, got to Madrid, and he made his last map, and his last map is very telling. But he also died in November of that same year, so he didn't have a lot of time to work. But another cosmographer after him, this is just a table of where they took longitude or latitude readings, and where they took, estimates of where things were that they didn't have latitude readings for. And to me, these are pretty spot on. And if you want to say, where is the Bay of Merlot? There's only one choice. It's Dead Man's Bay in Steinhatchee, Florida. It fits everything. But anyway, so Carlos Bay, if it's Redfish Pass and Ponderosa, they're, just spot on almost. They're spot on down in the Florida Keys. They're almost spot on everywhere else. And, their distances back then weren't too good. They're in a boat. They think they know how fast they're traveling. I don't know if they paid attention to the currents and the winds all that much. But it was an estimate only. The latitudes meant everything, I believe. And these guys weren't fooling around. They were trying to conquer their new world for whatever the economic reasons may have been. So the most important thing for the ship's pilots was to recognize land-based points once they got there. So the people before them had been developing these place names. But there's Florida. Beaches, and then right where we live, swamp. It's one of the richest ecosystems in the marine habitat there is in the world, really. But so when Alonso de Santa Cruz mentions a place name, he calls Blancas. Anyway, he talks about beaches. Well, there are no beaches up here. Yeah, there are. Keaton Beach, it isn't big. But if you believe in that, and you believe that these Spanish navigators were trying to find places they could hang their hat on so they knew where the hell they were, they would point to a beach in the middle of an otherwise swampy coastline as a place to go. So we go to the next thing, beach erosion. So in 1879, the state of Florida State Lands Office was somehow conned in or otherwise to survey these islands offshore of Dixie County. And in 1879, it was 143 some odd acres, several islands. So I'm just going to look at the two to the north. And in 1944, those two islands had split into several. In 1950, they changed the shape a little bit. In 1983, they were still there. And this is 1983, Coon Island. That yellow block is what was a resort fishing camp type thing, and a dock on the lee side of the island. And then in 1993, the no-name storm of the century came through. It was a double barrel cold front, and the islands aren't there anymore. And with bathymetric LiDAR, most of them are a little bit more than a meter below sea level, except for Coon Island, but the shallow spot is inshore of where that island used to be, and the house that had been there was on a hill or part of an old dune that was about 10 feet above sea level. So our shoreline has changed. So if we look at the largest Spanish galleons that both De Soto and Narvaez had, they drew about 4 meters of water. With the miracles of modern bathymetry, which we now have going out to about 35 meters below sea level, there are 2 anchorage spots that are in Dead Man's Bay where a galleon of that size could comfortably handle. If we go further, we can see the Pamlico Terrace or escarpment, along which, assuming that the Narvaez expedition, they hadn't found the bay yet, landed up on the north side. They came along the terrace and could see the sea, and then went inland to Stenhatchee. And this is the whole bay. And what you're looking at is the bay, and the yellow stuff offshore is a 1.25 meter below sea level depth. And then the white line outside of that is 4.5 meters below sea level, beyond which a galleon wouldn't want to go because it would wreck. So in 1939, the De Soto Commission came out and said, we think that, Narvaez and De Soto landed in Tampa Bay. And that was 1939. A lady named Barbara Boston said, I don't think that's true. And she pointed to the bay that everybody had lost as being right there in the Big Bend of Florida, which would have led to a big academic argument, except there was this little thing called World War II that got in the way. That's what I think happened. And this is my concluding shot, because if you look at Alonso de Santa Cruz's map and that finger that sticks down at A and the finger that sticks down that's now underwater at A and all these other things, they line up way too closely, I think. And this is based on modern LIDAR and what LIDAR can tell us about offshore. Anyway, I'm done.
Thanks.